million divided by the 225 to get the percentage, and then times that by 625 to get your new number. You see what I'm saying? So when we start arguing about the total amount of money we're going to appropriate, just keeping the same formula throughout would probably make it easier.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we're live streaming now as of about 20 seconds.
All right. Well, good for the public that's out there. We apologize. We had, again, that was probably a glitch, an internet glitch, where the live stream went down. We were just discussing a little bit of the process of how we're going to work this bill. And so we are going to work this bill from front to back. Senator Beitman was just talking about how we would do percentages on changing numbers. But we, what was recommended by the committee, and a recommendation I'll honor, is to go ahead and have a discussion. We, regarding section 2, which is right now the $175 million loan program, is whether or not to keep that a loan program or keep that as a grant program. And we wanted to have that philosophical discussion first. So with that, I see Representative Duncan. I'll let you take the first shot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have some questions. So with the PPP, whatever amount you spent, so say you received $20,000 and you had your 8 weeks.
Representative Duncan, I apologize. We need to move the bill before we work it.
I move that we move the bill.
Okay,
Work the bill.
Been moved. I'm going to have it seconded by Representative Henderson, who's the one that reminded me. Okay. So with that in mind, the first item on working this bill will be the discussion regarding a loan or grant. Representative Duncan, please continue. I apologize.
Thank you. So I guess my question is to the committee, if we look at it at the same process and an idea that the PPP is working under. So you have X amount of dollars, and of course there was payroll and things like that that were a part of it. But if you look at it at the end of the 8 weeks, if I spent $15,000 and I still had $5,000 left at the end of the 8 weeks, that $5,000 turns and becomes a 1% loan. So I guess my question is, can you do this loan with the idea that whatever's not expended by the December 30th date, or it may have to be sooner, that turns into the loan and the rest is forgivable, like what we were talking about? Or am I totally off base?
I'm going to take a little bit of a stab at that. So the issue that what we're trying to do with the loan is, again, we're addressing that constitutional issue. And by saying it's a non-recourse loan, we're saying that the only thing you can go after is the collateral from which it's secured. And if that collateral is nothing more than accounts receivable, that's probably already tied up by somebody's bank, it would be above and beyond. That's not very good collateral. So it's a non-recourse loan. Fits within some of the programs, the constitutionally defined programs we've had. And then we come in and give credit back for taxes paid and maybe a percent for employment. Then what we're doing is we're showing a tie back to economic, it's economic development in our other programs. In this program, it's quite frankly economic survivability or stability. So either we just do something simple and say this is all grants, and then hold our breath that leadership lets us take this forward, and that it doesn't get challenged in some way, shape, or form, or if it does, we win that challenge, or we keep a loan program in with our findings that gives us a fighting chance or an argument to it. I'll make one more comment and I'll be quiet. Here's one of the things I like about the loan concept of this. Even if we do a grant, you're still going to have to go in and fill out the application for the grant. You're still going to have to prove your losses. You're still going to have to get set up as an approved state vendor to receive your check. I also like the fact that if we're going to give out money in the loan or a grant, that we have something down the road that says that this was utilized to keep your business or to try to keep your business open in this state. I just want to have some accountability on that so we know that we're doing, that we're being responsible with, and I'm going to say it's not just now the state's money, it's the country's money. It's still all money we've paid in one way or another. So, okay. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now for a counterpoint, and I will make this argument that I think it should be a grant for several reasons. And I'm taking it from the perspective of, and for this, the purpose of this argument, the people who missed the PPP loan. And there were a lot of them in Wyoming that missed that. And I'm thinking of the person who has a lawn business or is raising cattle for the rodeo or whatever it is. We have a lot of people that they run their business out of a checkbook. They're probably a sole proprietor. Maybe they've got their spouse helping them out. And those are the people really and truly who were missed by the PPP program. So if we want to help them, I would argue that a grant is the best way to do it. And I would remind you, and I know you've heard it a million times, and I love the quote, it's from JP Morgan, and give or take, because it's been changed over the years, over 100 years, but he's supposed to have been quoted as saying, well, I don't know as I want a lawyer to tell me what I cannot do. I hire him to tell me how and what I want to do. And I think that that is so appropriate in this situation. When people throw up the Constitution, and I'm looking in particular at Article 3, Section 36, prohibited appropriations. No appropriation shall be made for charitable, industrial, economic, or benevolent purposes to any person, corporation, or community. If you look at the footnotes that define that, the intent of the section is to a prohibition against the delegation of power outside of private people and private industry. When the Constitution was drafted, they never in the world thought that the federal government would send us $1.25 billion to be distributed to the people of the state of Wyoming. And so I would argue very hard that we need to go forward with the best intent and the way that this can best be applied, and let the lawyers catch up with it. And you mentioned an appeal. Well, honestly, if this is all done, and I would never advocate flaunting the law or anything like that, but when this is done, we have to get this done by the end of the year. What's going to happen if somebody says, well, they didn't follow the Constitution? The money's going to be distributed. It will be gone. It, as was the direction that we received from the federal government. And, in other cases, if you continue to look at the footnotes, in other cases, the Supreme Court, the Wyoming Supreme Court, has specifically held that joint programs between federal government, and the one that I'm looking at talks about county government, does not violate the Wyoming Constitution. And we have joint programs all the time. Medicaid, like the list goes on and on. We have programs all the time where we get money from the federal government, and that money flows through to private industry. And I think that in this particular situation, the people who were missed by the PPP loan are the people who are basically running their business out of a checkbook. They don't have a relationship with a bank. They don't want a loan. If it says loan on it, they're automatically going to be head shy and not want to participate. If it says it's a grant because you're a Wyoming business person and you've lived here and I will just add one other thing. I think that the laundry list for those people should be pretty simple, and it should have a lot of and ors. For example, are you registered with the Wyoming Secretary of State? Do you have a Wyoming address? Do you do business in the state of Wyoming? If you answer any of the above questions, yes, then you apply for the grant. And to try and go in and put a lot of things that have to be met, or audits, or you have to submit your P&L. we're just going to miss those people and they will continue to not get any benefit. And I would just ask you to, or remind you to think about, these are hardworking folks that have been paying federal income tax all of their lives, and they've been paying property tax and everything else. They deserve to be helped out and taken care of. They have not been trying to shed their obligations. And this is the one time where we've got some federal funds. And I think that we need to do it in the most simple manner in order to take care of those people. As you go up the pecking order, as you go up into more sophisticated businesses that do have P&Ls and other things, in my opinion, that's a separate argument. So for right now, I'm just going to be talking about the people who missed the PPP. I think that they should receive a grant. Thank you very much.
It doesn't, that's what it says, is that people get a grant in first. So, Senator Biden.
Mr. Chairman, you're breaking up significantly.
Yeah, I don't know. We've got so weather's moving through. I don't know. That's first time. I bet. So, Senator Biteman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Representative McGuire. This needs to be a grant-only program, and this money needs to get out quickly. We are in a serious crisis right now. Our small businesses are hanging by the skin of their teeth. We've got to figure out how to get this out there quickly. And these PPP loans are already running out for some cases. I've heard from business owners here in Sheridan. So the real crisis is going to be June, July, August, September. And this money is desperately needed. And to have it tied up in red tape with the Business Council trying to administer a loan program, I just see this as a train wreck waiting to happen. As far as the constitutionality question goes, I think it's already been answered. You know me, I've always gone against the Business Council and challenged its constitutionality, but it appears that it was, it's kind of an end run around the Constitution to funnel money to be able to give money to businesses for economic development purposes. So on one hand, we've argued this for many years and it's held up, and the Business Council still does grants to private business. So I think the constitutional argument has been settled. So I think we should move forward with this grant money. This is what it was intended for by the federal government, to get relief to where it's needed, get it to the states who are nimble enough to get that money down to Main Street as fast as possible. So, and I don't think this is enough money. I think out of the $1.25 billion, to have us only have a small amount of that for business aid is not good, and it's not what my constituents want. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative and then Aaron.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'd like to know a little bit of the backdrop with Management Council on how these figures were picked. How was, out of the $1.25 billion, why is the bill drafted with $225 million of the available funding for these programs?
Go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since you're breaking up a little bit, I'll try and field that. I think first and foremost, it's important to realize that those numbers are flexible, and I think it's acknowledged that we don't have any perfect answers to what those numbers should be. I think it was an estimate based on probable demand, where you're multiplying some numbers of likely applicants by a mean value of what those loans or grants would look like before arriving at some numbers. So it doesn't mean the numbers are right, but that's about where they came from for this program. Another concept is that the way the other pieces of legislation that will likely be working through the special session are constructed, there is the possibility of moving additional resources into these programs if the demand on these programs is significant. So you shouldn't read these as limitations, a total cap, but it would be prioritization at that point. So if one of these programs proved very valuable and very effective, it would be reasonable to be moving some of the other tranche money into any of these programs, and the other pieces of legislation would certainly allow that. And then the third and final thing I would say with regard to the choice of the amount is, again, the amounts were chosen to a large degree based on the initial conditions that were put on the proposals in the legislation. So if those are adjusted, you can imagine the values would have to be adjusted also, even for a kind of a modest or down the middle of the plate type approach. And I'll yield to the chairman if he has anything to add that I missed, but I seem to have a better connection.
Representative Air?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One other factor that I think we need to make sure we do not forget is that making of a loan does not constitute an expenditure. And if this is a 10-year loan, that doesn't become an actual expenditure of the funds until that loan is forgiven. If it's not forgiven for 10 years, how do you reconcile that with the fact that the CARES money has to be expended by the end of this year? I do like the idea of some of the ideas of making it a loan, but I think that's another factor that would favor making this a grant rather than a loan to fit in with the CARES Act provisions.
Okay. I may have to turn over message that my internet winds gusting severely. So, Chairperson, can you take over?
Sure, I sure can. Sorry about your connection. Anybody else want to speak on this, whether we make it a grant or a loan? Representative Crank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm in favor of going to a grant, just then I don't see the difference between section 2 being grant and then section 3 changing so you're having a loan. If you can do grants, you can do grants. I don't follow the argument that you have to do a loan because of the constitutionality of the thing. If you're in another section, you're doing grants. So I'd look towards the grants.
Representative Furphy, how about your?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, let me raise a couple of issues. I'm also in favor of doing the grants. Most of these business customers already have debt. And they, as part of that debt, they've typically signed a loan covenant restricting the amount of debt to equity that they can have. So they would have to violate those loan covenants if they took on a loan, whereas with a grant, they would not. I'd also point out in this bill on page 15, as was raised before on lines 9 through 11, this is saying we would have to subordinate, banks would have to subordinate to the new lender or the business council, because it's saying it takes priority, this financing would take priority over other third parties. So I'm just saying this is going to be very difficult for the business customer. And so rather than going through all these fights, I think a grant makes so much more sense. Thank you.
Representative Henderson, then Representative Laux.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Chairman Greer as far as down the road, making sure that we work into this if we can, ways to encourage, long-term viability in Wyoming. But going with the other three pieces of legislation, it seems like we have an opportunity here with going with the grant idea of emergency response, and so we get some money in the short term in the business hands, and I think the grant is probably the quickest way to do that because it doesn't bump into some of the other things in terms of the calculus that banks have and lenders and borrowers. So I would prefer or promote the idea of grants. We could always come back in the session and add, we can go back in the session and add to it, as we saw, like I think Senator Rothfuss said, we saw areas where, you know, there was more interest in those areas in terms of, you know, fine tuning it to put dollars into areas of higher popularity or need. Thank you.
Representative Laux.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I guess I'll echo that on the grant thing. I'm getting texts and emails from people that are saying they've had contact with banking industry and that there's not a whole lot of interest in this, the way it's structured, and it's gonna be more nimble to get the grants out there. And so I'm in favor of a grant. There's other things we'd like to talk about too, as far as, I mean, headquartered in Wyoming, what that means, and then also the whole idea of required closure too, which I guess we'll talk about individually. Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, just a couple of points of discussion, and I definitely understand the sentiment and the advantages of grant over loan, but I just wanted to respond to a couple of the points of discussion. With regard to why this section, the section 3, the loan program versus the section 2, section 2 is more constrained, smaller amounts of money, and very clearly and almost unquestionably capable of being shown to be a response to loss that the state can reasonably make up and for particular use. So the idea of the constitutionality of that relatively small amount of grant, while still potentially having some concern, is on sound footing. When you free up what it can be used for, make it much larger and make it entirely flexible, that was where I think our staff and others started having some concern about the constitutionality. Now, that said, it's very much up in the air whether this is or is not a constitutional concern, because one of the other discussion points is these are federal funds. If we're using them as a pass-through, are they constrained by our constitutional provisions, yes or no? Attorney General currently feels that these are pass-through funds and that we could use them probably in any way we want, which would support the idea that you can use it for a grant. Our LSO attorneys are not particularly comfortable with that interpretation, and the idea of providing a grant to a business of $200,000 or $300,000 is not something they're enthused about. Whereas if we give them tax credits as the relief at a later point over time, all of a sudden we can do that while being fully constitutional. So while I understand that it seems like there's similar programs, and in a lot of ways they are, sections 2 and section 3, and of course section 4 is again a grant program, are trying to recognize that there are constitutional concerns that are present and have not been resolved. And we're quite comfortable, I think, that what is in section 3 as the loan program with basically full forgiveness, as long as you're using tax credits to get you towards that forgiveness, is going to be constitutional. Now, all of that said, I don't know that that's decisive. I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware and understood the reason that we are where we are, where we've got a grant program, then a loan program, and then another grant program. The two grant programs are pretty easy to justify from a constitutionality standpoint and satisfy both our Legislative Service Office and the Attorney General. The constitutionality of Section 3 is not necessarily satisfying our Legislative Service Office, so they drafted it in this manner, which does satisfy our Legislative Service Office. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that background as we're discussing it and the motivation for that. There are good points certainly being made, but I wanted to ensure that everyone understood the way that was stepped through. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Ayer, did you have a comment? No? Okay. Anybody else throwing their hand up? The chair would entertain a motion to make section 3 a grant, if that's what you want to do. Representative Burkhart,
Chairman, I would make the motion that section 3 be changed to a grant program and that the language be conformed to that concept.
Second,
who seconded it?
Furphy.
Murphy, okay. Okay, is there any discussion? Any further discussion? Duncan, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a quick question. What about the ag businesses? Do they pay sales tax? Would they, so that would be beneficial for the grant versus the loan side of things, correct? Help me.
I don't understand the question.
I don't think I understand either. You're saying they don't pay any sales taxes, so they wouldn't get a credit? If they.
So your
use a
ag
grant, that
livestock
wouldn't be a-
people don't pay sales tax. So
Right.
they would never get a loan forgiveness, correct? I'm just asking for some clarification.
I think that might be correct. Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think they pay excise tax on some things such as equipment. And that I know of one who tried to bring in a large piece of equipment and was caught at the border and had to pay the excise tax on that piece of equipment. So they do pay the excise tax, and that portion says all taxes, not just sales tax. If I'm trying to find it, any and all state taxes. So an excise tax would be included in there, and I think the any and all would also include, say, severance taxes from a mining company.
Chairman Greer.
I don't know if my there's an awful lot in property.
It's not working.
Chairman
property
Greer.
taxes. Yeah.
Chairman Greer, you can't be, I suggest that you turn your video off and just go with audio so that your bandwidth will support what you're saying.
Okay, does that work? Is that better, Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Sure
that's a lot
is.
better. Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
Let me go with that. So ag pays a lot in property tax. And folks, committee members, I don't care if this is a grant or a loan program. I just was given directives from our leadership on this point. And we were given clear and I want to say guidance from LSO concerning the constitutionality of it. So if you can hear me, let me speak to this. The first bucket, the first 25 million is directed right at those businesses that have suffered a loss, an immediate loss as a result of regulatory action. Think about how we've done that before. If your cattle herd has brucellosis, we quarantine the herd, we may destroy the herd, and then we will compensate you for the herd. Okay, so we've done that before. That's similar. Okay, the third tranche of this regarding protective devices or equipment for the health and safety of employees, we do that through our workers' comp grants, and there's several of those that are set up. The area that is not quite as clear, and I know you can all make the arguments on this, and they're good arguments, and I hear you, but the part that's not quite so clear is that middle component where we are actually stimulating the economy, where we are reimbursing for lost revenues, a result of the closure. But what we're doing is priming the pump for our economy to get started back up again. So if we go with a grant, what this committee says, that's fine. Can I guarantee this committee that we'll see that bill in special session? I cannot. I hope I'm persuasive in doing so because I respect the views of this committee. But the one thing I do want to make sure that we do on that number 2 is that we make sure that there are some conditions on that grant. If it becomes a grant, we follow up on it. We need to make sure we are not just giving people money to give them money. We need to make sure that they're going to be taking that money and putting that into their businesses so that that is circulated in our economy and opening up our main streets. So do not forget that component, please. Okay, so glad you could hear me. That's my 2 cents. I'm done. And I respect the opinions of this committee and will work with you as hard as I can.
Representative Iyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Greer, would you speak to the issue of having the loan extend beyond December 31st of this year and how that reconciles with the CARES Act?
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, Representative Bear. So the initial guidance come out, 4 points on the guidance. Okay, then we received 3 days ago 3 pages of guidance, and in that 3 pages they talked in terms of loans, and they started to soften on that. As we sit here right now, that issue is maybe those loans have to be forgiven on December 30th. I think that's a deadline for the CARES Act. But that guidance keeps moving. And so there's nothing to say we're going to be in a special session on the 15th. We're going to come back later. We could put a trap door in there if we wanted to. Many businesses, if you think about it, if we put a payroll component in there, are going to be able to by the end of the year. Start.
We're really losing you again. Representative.
Yeah, I knew about it.
Yeah, I think we've lost your audio. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. Hopefully we can get the chairman back in a moment when a cloud passes over or whatever the case may be. But one other point is I'm going to resist this amendment. And again, I'm not thoroughly behind the loan versus grant. I'd be happy to go either way, but Section 3 is not well structured to be a grant program. If you just turn it from a loan to a grant and conform the language, then you're giving away an awful lot of money without any backside obligations or responsibility that money be used rationally, that it generate sales tax in the state of Wyoming, or really anything else, because the strings present in Section 3 are based on the fact that it's a loan with the possibility of forgiveness, where the forgiveness depends on the generation of sales tax. So you either pay it back or you work in Wyoming, which checks itself. You turn it into a grant, and I don't even need to hire my employees back. I don't need to do anything. I could just have a great day when I get the grant and shut the business down. So the amendment needs to be an awful lot more than just let's make it a grant and conform. We would have to entirely think through the process to do that, which is why I'd rather see it go forward as a loan with forgiveness and work on the forgiveness to the point where we recognize all of these interests and also recognize that we may have to fully forgive the loan at the end of the year. So how can we get to the point where a forgiveness provision accomplishes what everyone here wants, and also get to the point where it's not just a couple of revenues, but what other revenue can we bring in to demonstrate, for example, more revenue off of ag? I think grocery stores too, that's a challenge that I thought of. I was talking to Chairman Greer about, since we don't have sales tax off of the food, that makes it a little bit of a challenge. So we know there are challenges, but I think the loan structure language works better right now. And that's not to say we can't come up with a different structure, but we can't simply change from loan to grant and have it work out elegantly. And maybe Chairman Greer's back enough to weigh back in.
Chairman Greer, are you back? Doesn't look like it. This
Trying to call in here.
6, 3. This meeting password is invalid.
This amendment just says we change it from a grant or from a loan to a grant, and we haven't worked the details of the paragraph or Section 3 yet. So I agree with you that we're going to have to work Section 3 a little harder if we're going to change to a grant. But the original question was, should we discuss grant or loan? And that is the original question we're working on. Chairman Greer, are you back?
Yeah, Brian?
You're on.
You're on.
You're on, Chairman Greer. You're in and you're
Okay.
on.
You're on audio.
Well, I'm just doing this the old fashioned way. So, okay, get my phone. Sorry.
Okay, I had another hand up. I think it was Senator Wasserberger and then Representative McGuire. Senator Wasserberger.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm struggling to understand this entire concept, but I look at the 3 bills that were sent out by Director Obrecht as a collective group of bills trying to address this issue. And as I understood those 3 bills, the governor can move money to almost any program. Is that correct? And then, so essentially, if you start this bill passes and you have $175 million in loans and no one's using that money or asking for that money, or there's money left over, as I understand the bills, they could be moved to any other program. And so to me, the amount of money in each particular bill really doesn't make much difference, because once it starts, the governor has the opportunity to move it. And then also we have a future session coming up in June sometime. So at this point in time, I'm going to stick with what at least Management Council has put together in this bill, and our 2 chairmen have put together in this bill. So I'm going to be supporting the loan at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I won't beat this too much, but I would speak in favor of turning it into a grant. And again, just think of your own experience and how many people you know that have a small business with 2 or 3 people or maybe 5 people working, and they don't do monthly P&Ls. They don't know what their loss is. They're out there working every day as hard as they can. They're trying to do everything that they possibly can to mitigate what has been a disaster so far in the first quarter. And they are hoping that this summer that they can salvage what has turned out or started as a very poor year. And they're not going to be, they don't have time to go in and deal with keeping records and everything else. They are going to be 24/7 trying to save their business and trying to get moving forward. And, you know, when we look at a business with less than 100 employees, well, the majority of businesses, I don't know what Wyoming is, but the majority of businesses in rural states like Wyoming have 2.5 employees. And one of those employees is the owner operator, and usually with a helper and a couple part-time people. And they're doing everything that they can to work their business, and they just don't have time to figure out what their taxes are, to offset against taxes, to keep track of losses, to try and dream up what the losses are. You know, we need to keep it simple, put the money in their hands, and trust that they're not going to go to Cancun with it. They're going to try and save their business and try and put that money back into the Wyoming economy. And I would just say, overall, I think the important policy is that the money stay in the state of Wyoming. You know, I don't want to get too much on a soapbox, but our biggest problem is we've globalized. We have big companies that have come into the state of Wyoming, and they take that money out of the state. At night, when they hit their deposit button, that money goes out of state and it goes somewhere else. We're talking about small businesses that buy their clothes here, that buy their groceries, that buy their trucks, that buy their equipment, and they put Wyoming people to work, and that's what makes the economy go around. And I think that's who we need to take care of, and I think that the grant is the proper way to do it in an expedited manner, and I don't think it will violate the Constitution in any way, shape, or form. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman Greer.
Yeah, so I'll agree with a lot. I'll put half my foot on Representative McGuire's soapbox. And I won't debate the constitutionality anymore. But I don't know if I'm particularly comfortable with just a grant? What are we going to just give everybody that applies a certain amount of money? I think that, you know, so the first part of that is a formula to help immediate help. I mean, we're trying to get that done in 2 weeks. The second pot of money is got to be some demonstration of damage or need associated with it. Some of those comments to me don't seem to hold up true with the bulk of the proposed legislation. Or some way, unless we're just going to say, hey, send in a piece of paper, a simple piece of paper, we'll give you $50,000 and we'll trust you to spend it the right way. Because I'm just going to say right now, the business that I run could probably apply for the third tranche, but has no business applying for anything in the second.
Senator Beitman, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My response to the concerns of Chairman Greer and Senator Rothfuss would be the Business Council. If you look at page 13, line 9, the Business Relief Loan Program, if we just change that to grant program is hereby created, it still says the Wyoming Business Council shall establish and administer this program. So the Business Council can write the rules and regulations and set up the program to add the sideboards that we're talking about. We don't have to get into the weeds drafting this bill. It's already in the bill. We just change it from loan to grant, and we let the Business Council set up the parameters and let the banks dole out the money, and then the Business Council can do can be responsible for the auditing of the program, just like the SBA does with the PPP loans and things like that. So set it up similar to the PPP program, where there's sideboards on it where you use it for payroll. In this case, we're using it, it says right here, for the purpose of providing loans. We change that to grants to eligible businesses adversely impacted by COVID-19 pandemic or required closures. It's already in the bill, page 13. So I think we're making a lot out of nothing, and we need to move on. Thank you.
Representative Duncan, you're next, then Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm coming at it from a little different perspective. At first, I thought about just the grant, but the more I'm hearing, the more I'm thinking, you know what, why on the loan part, we should just be concentrating on the forgiveness part so much more than actual loan. So it ends up being a grant somewhat, because it ends up being exactly what the PPP is. Because if you have talked to your bankers, there's a problem. A lot of these people who went in and applied and who are upset that they didn't receive funds, you got to remember, you have to have expenses in order to receive those funds. And a lot of people that applied, my bankers were telling me and explaining, a lot of the people that applied were the people who have written off all their expenses and everything. So they had nothing to show and prove that they actually had payroll and they actually had those expenses. So that's where some of this problem was, is that the people who were applying didn't qualify because it was a payroll protection program. So yes, I think we can help some of those people with the grant who didn't formally fit the PPP model, but those that actually applied who fit the criteria actually got the funds. So the other part of that on the PPP was that it was certain 501, certain different nonprofits, and some were and some weren't, and some of your fraternal organizations didn't and some did. And so that's part of the problem with the PPP as well. So more importantly, we have to talk apples and apples and oranges, because some of the people that didn't qualify, it's because they didn't have the payroll expenses to be able to qualify, as according to the IRS. So this grant program works perfect for those that qualify. Again, if we go back to what Goshen County did, Goshen County had a simple application. You've applied, and then after you got the funds, then you were required, based on that grant, you were required to submit your expenditures on a receipt. I have to give some pushback. I am a 3-man operation, and I tell you what, I keep track of my expenses. I have to do my taxes just like everybody else, and I file. So I don't care whether you're a 1-man or a 3-man or a 50-man, you're going to keep track of your taxes, of your expenses to submit. And if I'm getting money, then I'm more than happy to submit my receipts to let the grantor know how I spent my money. And as far as the loan, I think we've beat this to death, and I appreciate the grant idea. But just like we heard from testimony from one of our bigger businesses, they would appreciate the loan, just like the horse racing as well. The horse racing industry would appreciate the loan because it's going to be a forgiveness. So it's semantics, because eventually it's going to be just like the PPP and just like a grant, because we're forgiving that part. So I'm in favor of the original drafting of the bill, and we just need to work on the forgiveness portion of it and work that out.
Senator Rothfuss, then Representative Burkhart. Then,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, and going back to Senator Beitman and Representative McGuire's points about favoring the grant side, I wonder if it would work to strengthen Section 2 and provide more possible funds through Section 2 as a grant vehicle, so that you can address better the target population and maybe put more funds there or something instead of a loan program, so that we're not eliminating the loan program, but doing a better job with the grant program as it's defined to meet those interests. And I think that's a perfectly rational approach. And I'd be interested in knowing your thoughts on that.
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having made that motion, I can see some difficulties with it. And part of the problem I'm having, and most people know I'm pretty nitpicky on wording in bills, is we're looking at a bill we've had roughly, I don't think we've had 48 hours to look at it and digest it. I can see benefits to both sides. And I do feel we probably need to do some sort of control on any grant program. I think Senator Rothfuss made a good point with looking at Section 2 and maybe changing that. And that I'll let the proposed amendment go to a vote. And what I said about conforming the language would make it look somewhat like Section 2. But it's difficult to do in this scenario of us sitting in different locations and saying, okay, we have, until I guess next Friday to do this. We can all sleep where we are, I guess. But I can see difficulties on both sides, and trying to do something in this manner is, for me, difficult. So, and if we leave it as it is for now, I probably have some other proposed amendments that I had written down before I considered turning it into a grant program.
We do have another meeting on the 11th that we could discuss this some more. So this isn't the end game for us. This was just a question somebody brought up to ask if we wanted to do a grant instead of that. So Representative Laux, I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So with the great discussion, I surely am okay with either a grant or a loan. I guess I'm more concerned with, like Representative McGuire brought up, on page 7, understanding what headquartered in Wyoming is. We want this to benefit our Wyoming companies. And there's a lot of companies in Wyoming that really aren't headquartered here that probably might be able to have advantages. I really am more concerned about us making sure it's a company that, they pay their taxes in Wyoming. I mean, this is where when they pay their taxes, the Wyoming's their home. It's not Colorado or someplace else. So I'm good either way with loan or grant, I guess, but as long as we make sure that it's benefiting real, true Wyoming companies that pay their taxes as a company from Wyoming. Thank you.
Okay, good. Representative Crank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate all the explanation that the chairman and Senator Rothfuss put out there. And yeah, I'm all right with the loan part of it too. But I think the explanation is that you have to have some kind of a means to make sure somebody pays that back and you're not just giving money away. And I don't know how you do that with a grant. Just here's your money and see you in Tahiti when because I'm getting a grant too, and we'll meet down there. So I think I'm fine with kind of leaving it like it is.
Senator Bateman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you all look at page 15, line 16, Romanet 5, this is in the loan program. It says, before making a loan under this section, the applicant shall demonstrate to the council's satisfaction the actual losses that the eligible business has incurred as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, or as a result of the business interruptions due to required closure. There's your sideboards. If you just change loan to grant, it's still there. And the business council can promulgate rules to ensure that nobody's running off to Tahiti with this money. And let's also not forget that these businesses need this money because of the government shutting them down or indirectly shutting them down through collapsing the demand for their business or product. So then to turn around and charge them interest on money that they need to stay alive is, to me, it's a tough pill for my constituents to swallow. And it's kind of, it goes against the whole point of the CARES Act. So again, we need to get this money out quickly. This loan program could become cumbersome and the money might not get out there fast enough. So I think what we're looking for is already in this bill, and we just need to move forward with the grant. Thank you.
Oh, okay, Chairman Greer.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. So, again, you've heard me, I've explained why that loan is in there. That's all. Okay. We go loan grant, I have concerns about the bill being brought forward with what was relayed to me, but it's a different issue. What Senator Bateman said is correct. If we go forward in this, we vote for a grant program, we've got to continue to have those sideboards and that accountability. There are many grants that people receive out there where they sign contracts. And I just administered a grant program along this way, where we had, they signed contracts and they had requirements for 3 years on that. That's not unusual on a grant program. As Representative Duncan said with what they did in Goshen County, they got their grant, they must have applied for a certain dollar amount, then they had to go prove up that they did so. So it can work both ways. I just want you to know, while I lean towards and going to support the loan program, if this goes for a grant, if this is a grant program by the vote of this committee, I'm going to respect that. But I want to make darn sure that we've got those sideboards, as Senator Bateman said, which I think probably are in. I think he's pretty close on point with that. So.
Okay, we have a motion on the table, and the first question was, should we make it a grant or a loan on Section 3, that 175 million? I think we'll go ahead and vote on that so we can get through moving through this bill. So the first question was, should we change it to or the motion was, should we change it to a grant instead of a loan? And I'm going to have you raise your hands in the affirmative and the negative. So all in favor of that motion, raise your hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4. All those opposed, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 opposed, 6 for it. So that motion has failed. So let's go back where we were. I think we were going to start through this page by page was the idea, and make any changes until that question came up. So let's go back to page 3, section 1. Is there any changes anybody'd like to make on that? Yes, Representative Burkhart.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, line 17, it says following nationwide cancellations, suspensions, and growing cases. I would add wording in there for clarification, nationwide cancellations and suspensions of public and private events and activities, or similar language.
of public and private what?
Events and activities.
Oh. Any discussion on that amendment? Any
You need a
discussion?
second.
Any discussion? Is there a second? Is there a second? Oh, Representative McGuire seconded it. Any discussion? Hearing none, sensing you're ready to vote. All in favor of the amendment for line 17 to after suspensions, put of public and private event and activities. Signify by raising your right hand, your any hand. 5. All opposed, same sign. 7 opposed. That amendment does not pass. Any other amendments on page 3? Other amendments on page 3? Hearing none. Page 4. Is there any amendments on page 4? Oh, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this starts on page 4, but carries over to subsequent pages. And I'll start it at line 11 and line 19. Line 11 says the crisis, without defining it. Line 19 says public health crisis. And other places we use public health emergency. I would propose an amendment that all of those be conformed to one term, whether it be public health crisis or public health emergency, just for consistency in the bill.
So you'd like to have page 4 and subsequent pages changed to public health crisis.
Oh,
Second.
yeah.
Is there a second? Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Ayer. Okay, any discussion on that? Any discussion? Any discussion on that? Hearing none, ready to vote. All in favor of the amendment to make it public.
Point of order, point of order, point of order.
Yes.
Representative Burkhart wanted to intervene.
Oh.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
Thank you. If you want the other quotes on that, it would be page 5, line 17, page 5, line 20, page 5, line 14, and all of those are included. I just want the language to conform to one terminology, which we've decided is public health crisis.
And Brian, do you have all those? Okay.
I believe there are others.
Senator Rothfuss. Can't hear you, Senator Rothfuss.
Sorry, I thought I clicked it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The motion would be to make it public health crisis as the selected choice of the two.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor of the motion signify by raising your hand. All opposed, same sign. Vote was 10-3. That motion passes. On to any other changes on page 4. Page 5. Is there any changes on page 5 besides the one we've discussed? Yes, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not an amendment, but a discussion. Line 7 indicates political subdivisions. You know, that just a discussion that it would include numerous things such as cemetery districts, irrigation districts. A lot of those we've defined as political subdivisions. Is that the intent?
Good question. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, most of this language was actually drafted through Management Council for the other bill and then brought over here as similar findings. And I'll start off by noting that this is findings. So if we're a little bit off, life's going to go on. And second of all, political subdivisions, some of them are affected, some of them aren't, but to the extent that we don't necessarily need the detailed scrutiny, since it's not policy compelling, we didn't really dig into it very much in Management Council when we worked it.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay. All right. Anything else on page 5? Page 6. Page 6. Page 6 runs right into section 2. Anything on page 6? Nope. All right. On page 7, how about anything on page 7? Page 7, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, one concern I had on page 7, it says has 50 employees or less. The question I would have is when, and I don't know if we have a sense of that, but it seems that we should have a date certain on when they had 50 employees, and we use elsewhere the date of March 31st, I think, for another consideration. Where
March 15th, I thought.
is it March 15th? That makes more sense than March 31st. Yeah, March 15th. So, Mr. Chairman, I would move, and I'm just going to make one motion and do it twice based on the same logic, that for this D provision and then for the next section that requires 100 employees, that it incorporate a date certain of March 15th for the date of registration for that number of employees. So basically so that somebody can't fire a bunch of employees to make themselves eligible for this program. That's my motion.
Second.
Seconded by Representative Henderson. So March 15th is put in, has 50 employees or less on the March 15th.
Yeah, Representative Burkhardt has a point on that.
March 15th, 2020. Okay, who had their hands up? Oh, Representative Burkhardt.
Just a question on that. Since March 15th, I know a lot of businesses have had to lay off people and are now down to a considerably smaller workforce. I guess I'm just wondering how we take that into consideration when they may have gone from 100 employees, say at a bar or restaurant on March 15th and are down to 10 or 15 today. I wonder about the date, if we want to change that to something that recognizes the fact they've lost a lot of employees.
Other discussion. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm not averse to that concept either. I don't care. And the 50 employees isn't magical to me either. I just want to make sure that there's a date certain that they can't game in any way. And you know, that could be April 15th. And that won't be gamed either. So if anyone wants to make an amendment to the proposed amendment with a better idea, I'm not averse to it. I just want to make sure that we've got a date certain.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm fine either way, but my comment would be we should probably define if that is 50 full-time or part-time, or whether it's contract employees. We should put in some kind of language, because otherwise we'll have people trying to administer the program and wondering what the definition should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Other discussion? Representative Burkhardt.
Mr. Chairman, I would propose an amendment to the amendment to make the date May 1st.
Why?
Representative Laux, did you have a comment?
Oh, sorry. I got my.
Any other comment? Is there a second to the amendment to the amendment? Is there a second to the amendment to the amendment? The amendment to the amendment dies for lack of a second. Is there any other amendments to the amendment? Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How about as of March 15th? Does that meet the criteria that we're looking for, that they had to have had 50 employees as of March 15th? Because after that, they may have let them go until they can reopen. I'm just wondering what direction we're going here.
Mr. Chairman, I'd say that was the motion. At least that was the intent of the motion, was that as of concept.
Okay, good, good. Representative Laux.
Yeah, do we, so there's this good discussion from Representative McGuire is concerning the, I'd like to see the language in there that says full-time employees. Is there any support for that as an amendment?
Chairman Greer.
Yeah, I thought that was a motion. I was seconding the motion. I think it ought to read that on March 15th, 2020 has 50 or less full-time or FTEs, full-time equivalent employees. Right? Isn't that what we want to get to?
That was the amendment, Representative Laux. Okay, we're on the amendment to the amendment by Representative Laux to make it 50 FTE. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Hearing none, sensing ready to vote. All in favor of the amendment to the amendment to make it 50 FTE? Raise your hand.
Point of order,
Oh, yep. Okay, who's that?
Mr. Chairman,
Burkhart?
the motion was, have we voted on the amendment to the amendment, or that's what we're doing?
We're voting on the amendment to the amendment. I've got to
Okay.
get back to the amendment. So we're on the amendment to the amendment, which said make it 50 FTEs. That's what we're voting on right now. All in favor, signify by raising your hand. 11 for it. All opposed, raise your hand. None. That amendment to the amendment passes. Now we're back to the amendment that said as of March 15, 2020, that would be when the employees were counted. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a quick question for those that would do this kind of reporting frequently. Would March 31st make more sense as an end of quarter, and therefore your filing will be easier to corroborate? I see thumbs up. I'm going to, without objection from the second, amend my amendment to March 31st instead of March 15th because the paperwork should sort easier. Looks like the
No
second
objection
has
from
thumb
the
up.
second.
Yeah.
Second's okay with it. Okay. Representative Laux, did you have some input? No? Okay. So we know the amendment's been changed. The amendment we're voting on is to put the date in as of March 31st, 2020. All in favor, raise your hand. That's unanimous. That's unanimous.
A question?
Yep.
Did you state March 31st or March 30th?
March 31st. Is there 31 days in March?
I don't think there is.
Oh, well, that'll be a problem.
Let me look.
Yes.
I think it's 30 days have March, April.
30 days has September, April, June, and November. March.
Oh, let's have 31.
March
has 31.
Okay.
Yeah. I know it's not
My
February.
bad.
Brian Fuller would like to speak.
Mr. Chairman, were those two changes? I know there was discussion about this also applying to the language regarding 100 employees in the loan program. Is the intent of the committee that both of these changes apply to that provision as well?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I referred to that in the original motion, correct?
Yep. So you got that one? Both places? Okay, is there anything else on page 7? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And not to drag this out too much, but line number 2, where it says was established, that is kind of risky language insofar as, does that mean when they filed with the Secretary of State? Does that mean when they first filed their first tax return? Or does that mean when they took out their first Yellow Page ad? We have a lot of small businesses that don't have a registered name with the Secretary of State. They do operate as a true entity, but they're a pass-through entity. And, so I think that we need to define for the people who are going to be administering this, what established means. Thank you.
Representative McGuire, can you tell me where you are on the page 7?
Line 2.
Line 2? I don't see that on line 2. Oh, all right.
First word.
First line. Yeah, okay. All right. Do we need that, or can the business council write that in the rules? Maybe we'll have to leave it to them. I have an amendment. I would like to eliminate paragraph E, line 14 to line 22, eliminate it entirely.
Second.
That's the part about the funding from the PPP and everything else about it, everything run in there. I'd like to eliminate that paragraph entirely. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by
Laux.
or no, it was Beitman. I have a Representative Iyer. Did you get your comment in? No.
No, not, when you get through with this, I have another comment.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Representative Laux, did you have a comment?
No, sir.
Oh, okay. Is there any other comments on my motion to eliminate paragraph E?
Mr. Chairman.
14 to 22. Yes, Representative Duncan.
Mr. Chairman, I believe Chairman Greer had his hand up and then he disappeared. So he might still be, oh, there he is. He has his hand up.
All right, we'll let him talk.
Yeah, sorry. I have really good internet service. I don't know what's going on, but I'm not opposed to opening this up. I do think, though, with the discussions from the governor's office and the testimony that we took today for the public, that we should at least give a preference to those businesses that did not receive the PPP. I'm not going to argue against opening this up at all, but I do think we should leave that preference in there. That was testimony we heard. I know that was the initial thought out of the governor's office with this program from the beginning. So I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you would consider leaving that in, but just this would be a friendly amendment, that those businesses that did not receive, and let's just stick with the Paycheck Protection Program, would have a preference on the funds, on receiving the grant.
I think that could be a second amendment. This would eliminate the entire paragraph, and then we could put a paragraph in there we want. Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, you just said what I was thinking. If we took out that paragraph, we can, when we get to page 10, we can add where we start giving the business council their directions and stipulations on the program. We can slip it in as a new paragraph G and then renumber appropriately, or when we get to page 10, that's where that could probably slip in there to give preference.
That work for you?
Yeah, I don't disagree, because Senator, you're right, because the eligible business means in E is a component of that definition. So we would have to put the preference later. I agree, as long as you all vote. Okay.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion to eliminate paragraph E, line 14 to 22 on page 7? Oh, Senator Beitman. And then Furphy.
Sorry, I thought we were voting, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Furphy, did you have some more input? Can't hear you.
They're voting.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chairman. No, I was also thinking you were voting. So.
Oh, okay. All right. All in favor of the motion to eliminate that, raise your right hand or your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 for it. All opposed, raise your hand. That motion passes 8-6. I think that eliminates anything on page 7.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
okay, I would like to talk about another motion, another amendment on page 7, please.
Okay.
Okay, on the section C, headquartered in Wyoming, as we talked about earlier, I'd really like some language in there that makes sure that these are really Wyoming companies that file their income tax in Wyoming. So I'd like to make a motion as headquartered in Wyoming and files a federal income tax in the state of Wyoming. Do I have a
Is there
second?
a second on that motion? Is there a second on that motion? Is there a second? Seconded by Representative McGuire. In discussion. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of concerns and I'd urge resisting the motion. The first is I've never actually seen it phrased that way when we've done this work over the past however long, when we're trying to make sure that it's a Wyoming corporation. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know why, but it worries me that we've never seen that. And that sort of raises a flag for me that maybe there's something there or a reason there that you wouldn't want it. And the second is, honestly, I had the same concern as Representative Laux to ensure that this language was sufficient. But the way this provision is funded, it's literally funded based on the number of Wyoming employees. Or let's see, that's not under the employee. I thought it was employed in Wyoming, but now I'm not seeing that right now. I was under the impression it was employed in Wyoming, and now I'm struggling to find that. But when I read it before, I thought it was covered. And again, the third point is, I think rules and regulations of the Business Council, they know what we mean on that one, I think, pretty well.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman,
Burkhart.
Yeah, this Mike, I don't know if you can see me or not. Actually, Senator Rothfuss kind of talked us up on paragraph D. We need to say at 50 FTEs in the state of Wyoming. Be more specific there. Headquartered in Wyoming or has its principal operations located in Wyoming, I think is pretty specific. There, we have, so I recall when we were working with contractor preferences, we worked very carefully on some language of some large, like Optinol came to mind as a Montana company that has a significant presence in Casper. And so I think that language as is works and does, Representative Laux, what you want. So I'm going to oppose your amendment, but because I think we're getting it done. We do need to do something about Wyoming employees, though.
Representative Laux, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, my argument is this. So if we have, there's a lot of companies that have presence in Wyoming that are headquartered somewhere else. And so Wyoming's not the only state getting these funds. And so what it's going to do is give them an opportunity to work both sides, in my opinion. They'll be able to get some sort of favoritism in their own state and then Wyoming also. And I want us to protect people that really call Wyoming their home. Thank you.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, again, I think the solution to that, and I still felt like I had seen it somewhere, but if you put on page 9, line 12, $1,000 for every employee that the eligible business had employed in Wyoming and then we might want to change that to March 31st, 2020 also, so that it aligns with the other language. I think that accomplishes it better, maybe. And I agree with Chairman Greer that this language is coming out of that contractor preference language that we put into place a few years ago. Well, a decade ago, I think we put that in place, and I'm also comfortable with it. So maybe we can add it elsewhere to provide that reassurance.
Ryan Fuller.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the language in B and C actually comes verbatim from the Business Council Small Business Investment Credit Program.
Oh.
And I didn't see anything in the rules regarding B, but for C, the business council has in rule defined what headquartered means. And their definition in rule means an organization's principal office is located in Wyoming, and at least 60% of the organization's employees are employed in Wyoming, or 60% of the business payroll is paid to individuals living in Wyoming. And then principal office is the main administrative functions of the organization, and the original books and records are maintained in the Wyoming office. I can't speak for the promulgation of rules for this, but that's what's in rules for the existing program that was the genesis of this language.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a quick question for Brian. So having read that, that means we wouldn't have to do add in the state of Wyoming under D.
Right. Yeah, we don't have to.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, I mean, that's, I think ultimately a decision for the committee, whether it wants it in statute or leave that to rulemaking.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the purposes of discussion, I would encourage that we leave the language in Part D. And I think that I would encourage the bringer of the motion to consider one of the problems that we're going to have. And for example, the construction company that the good chairman mentioned that is principally officed in Montana, but has a big office here in Casper. Well, we want to prevent them from double dipping. We don't want them to go to the state of Montana, get a whole bunch of money, and then go to the state of Wyoming and get a whole bunch of money that should have gone to other Wyoming contractors. So I think that there should be some language in there to make sure that the business council takes a look, and if the money is going to the state of Wyoming, that they're not double dipping using the same number somewhere else. Thank you.
Okay, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I was just going to say on the D provision, we would not want to say in Wyoming. This is page 7, line 12, because it's a less than amount has 50 employees or less in Wyoming would not really achieve our objective.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I agree with that comment and retract my prior statements. Where we want the in Wyoming is when we're aggregating the number of employees that we're giving the grant for. So I'm getting tired. I apologize. Yeah.
Representative Laux.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I think my point should be clear. I mean, yeah, I don't want any double dipping either. If you look at it, I mean, for example, and there was mention of the in-state preference for contractors. I mean, if you look at a recent bid that came out in our city that had, I believe, 7 or 8 bidders, and they all had in-state preference, and only one of them was really a Wyoming company. The rest of them are all Colorado companies, but they still have in-state preference. I want to make sure that we're doing the best for people that really call Wyoming home, pay their taxes here, file their taxes here, and aren't going to be able to, pull funds out of Colorado's allotment and Montana's allotment and then Wyoming's at the same time. That's my intention. Thank you.
Okay, the motion on the table is to change line 9 is headquartered in Wyoming and files FIT in Wyoming, or has its principal operations located in Wyoming. All in favor of that motion, signify by raising your hand. All opposed, same sign. That motion fails 3-8. Okay, anything else on page 7? Anything else on page 7? Yes, Representative Ayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. Does this does this definition of eligible business include nonprofits? Maybe Brian could answer that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ayer, I think that's an open question, the way the bill is drafted. It does not explicitly exclude them, assuming that you treat them as a business, but it does not expressly include them either.
Is that on page 7, do you think, Representative Ayer?
6.
I don't see it. Oh, excuse me.
Well, page 7 is lists several criteria for what constitutes an eligible or eligible business. And I was just wondering if that would include nonprofits.
I think it could. The definition isn't specific, so it could. Yeah, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I believe it would, because a nonprofit business is a business. When you look at the bottom of page 6, line 23, eligible business means a business that, and then you go through the rest of the material, and I don't see you would have to exclude a nonprofit if you're referring to a Wyoming business, in my opinion. That said, if you wanted to belt and suspenders it because you really wanted to make sure that nonprofits were included, I think on line 23 of page 6, you could say eligible business means a nonprofit or for-profit business that, and you'd probably achieve absolute clarity.
If we can achieve the same thing without that, that's fine.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make sure, because on line 7, on page 7B, independently owned and operated, remember the testimony of those nonprofits that were board of director versus independent.
Okay, any other discussion? Page 7. Page 7, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'd ask Brian if he has any insight, Brian Fuller, into it, because when I take is independently owned and operated, that's not what I get out of it. I'm assuming that it's, not a publicly traded corporation. So maybe we need to know what that means.
Brian.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, again, that was from the small business investment credit. I think independently owned and operated, though, would, I believe the intent behind that would be limiting certain corporations that would be traded. Again, though, I think that's dependent on, the committee, if the committee has a different intent, can certainly amend that to read however it wishes.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just make a motion then that we amend the language as is appropriate to ensure that nonprofit corporations in Wyoming would be eligible businesses. And I don't care how it turns out. So I'll make that motion to Brian draft accordingly. If there's a second.
Second by Duncan and Ayer. Okay, the motion is to include nonprofits in the eligible businesses. Any discussion? Representative Ayer?
I just was thinking Chairman Greer has been trying to say something here. I didn't know if he was being recognized or not, or wanted to be.
Representative Greer, are you?
I'm actually eating a piece of pizza. We provided pizza to the employees today, and I just went and got some leftover pizza. So sorry.
Brian Fuller.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, it's the intent of this to apply to the other definitions and the other 2 programs as well.
Yeah.
Senator Rothfuss, yeah.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd be open to conversation on that. I don't see why we wouldn't. So I'll say yes, but if anyone thinks we shouldn't for some reason, please weigh in.
Representative McGuire.
Thank you. And I didn't mean to step on Representative Burkhart, but I think that there are 2 separate discussions here. First of all, there are some big companies that are registered as quote unquote nonprofits. One of them is trying to buy the hospital here in Casper. And even though they are quote unquote a nonprofit, they definitely operate for profit. And the way that they're buying the Casper hospital is because they have a massive bank account that they've accumulated by operating for profit, yet they don't pay any federal income tax. And these dollars that are going to be given back to people, basically, that's our income tax that's being given back to pump back into the economy. So as I mentioned before, the question becomes, what's fair? What's a quid pro quo? If these companies haven't paid anything in federal income tax, should they be receiving these funds? And when I say there's two separate arguments, we're all familiar with the small nonprofits. I'm on the board of a small nonprofit here in Casper that, yeah, we operate completely nonprofit. We don't have any employees. We're all volunteers. That's a whole separate deal than a big, massive company that's using a, let's say, I don't want to use the word, let's just say that they are taking advantage of certain provisions of the tax code in order to not pay federal income tax. Thank you.
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those were pretty much the comments I would have made. I mean, there are a variety of nonprofits, and I was just trying to figure out if we're including each and every nonprofit or only certain ones. You know, as Representative McGuire said, a nonprofit wants to buy the hospital. To me, that's a little different than a nonprofit that, say, works with those that have developmental disabilities, versus a variety of nonprofits. So just, I need clarification on that, is my question.
Chairman Greer.
Yeah, so I think the three separate programs deal with this separately and distinctly. So we're talking about this in bucket 2 right now, and we may want to squeeze that down just a little bit. But in you think about it, because we left it as a loan program in the third section, but the big bucket, you've got to pay taxes. So they're paying property tax, collecting sales tax. You know, they're contributing back into the economy. I guess it doesn't bother me quite as much. And then in the third bucket, you know, all we're doing is taking care of employees with for safety reasons. So I don't know, maybe we can tighten it up within those programs to make sure that we're getting more closely to those nonprofits, that, you know, the food banks, the homeless shelters, those types of things, without, as Representative McGuire saying, there are people there. I mean, there's a whole world of banking out there that operate as cooperatives or otherwise that have an advantage, a tax advantage. And I agree with his comments.
Senator Rothfuss.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, to address those concerns, all of the other requirements are always going to apply. So the small business headquartered in Wyoming showing an actual loss based on having COVID-related closures, all of those things still apply. So I do understand that there are not-for-profits out there that might be of concern if they were given eligibility. But I would say the same thing would be true of for-profit corporations. There are certain for-profit corporations that we don't want to give this money to because they haven't necessarily suffered a loss. They're not from Wyoming. They've got plenty of other resources. And in fact, we know from recent headlines that there are vast corporations that pay $0 in income tax each year. And that's been a very contentious issue. So I think it's hard to just rely on that, but to look to our communities and see, you know, who our employers are, which is really what we're trying to make sure. We're trying to make sure that our folks are able to keep their jobs, keep their revenue, you know, continue to pay the bills for their families. And it just turns out that we've got a lot of people that work for nonprofit organizations also and for-profit. And I don't see that, honestly, we'd want to be favoring only the for-profit small businesses and sacrificing the nonprofit small businesses, because again, they're just employing our friends and neighbors, and they can be small. It's just whether or not they're trying to make money or not. So I think including them with the same provisions that are required for the rest of the conditions on each of the 3 buckets is reasonable.
Okay, the motion on the table is to include nonprofits on each bucket, all 3 buckets. This one is on page 6, but there's other places also. Brian, is that clear what we're going to do with that?
So, Mr. Chairman, just to confirm, this change would apply to all three
Yeah.
3 programs.
All 3 programs. Yep. Okay, everyone in favor of that motion, raise your hand, please. All opposed, raise your hand. That motion fails 5-7.
And
Anything else on page 7? Anything else on page 7? Okay, page 8. Is there anything on page 8? Brian Fuller, you had something on page 8? No?
no, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Representative Duncan.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move the propose an amendment for page 8, line 7, after closure. Insert or public health orders.
Is there a second? Seconded by Henderson. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Would you like to discuss it, Representative Duncan? Or wait, let me, Senator Rothfuss, go ahead. Senator Rothfuss, is that technology too much for you?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, would the bringer of the amendment like to include the other 3 places as well as part of this motion? Okay. Looks
So
like that's a
3
yes.
places
And a second.
that will get or public health orders. Do
Yeah.
we know where that is so that Brian Fuller can get that in each place?
I think Brian
Got
can
it,
get it.
Brian?
Yep.
Okay, Representative Burkhart, you had a comment?
Just a question, does this adequately cover those businesses whose business was interrupted due to the whole thing? Not necessarily closures or public health orders. I know that was suggested language, but for example, say the local furniture store that cut back on its hours because they have no customers or that sort of thing. Does this cover that instance? Because they're affected. I just want to make sure we've done what we want to do with this.
Senator Bateman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Burkhart. I have an amendment to this amendment, assuming this one's going to pass, that addresses that. So and mine would add or the disruption in demand caused by any such orders or public health order or any such closures or public health orders. So I'm going to let this one go through and then I'll add my amendment to the amendment.
Okay, all right. Representative Laux.
I guess I'd just like clarification on the intent of the amendment. The whole section on required closure. I mean, I can give many examples of companies that have been devastated and they surely weren't closed. I mean, just think of the company that sells restaurant supplies, okay? The restaurants are closed, they aren't ordered to be closed, and they're not selling any restaurant supplies. There's many examples like that. Many people have been affected that weren't under closure. So is that what we're trying to do, Representative Duncan, with this, or does that accomplish that or not? Thank you.
Representative Duncan, would you like to answer that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just rereading here real quick to I think it's just defining further clarification that some of our counties have, and some of you can jump in here if you like, but some of our counties had more restrictions based on health orders versus the required closures by the state. So so I think it's just trying to really make sure that everybody's covered.
Okay, the amendment is to add any closures or public health orders. All in favor, raise your hand.
Representative Crank has something.
Oh, excuse me. Representative Crank, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Isn't this already covered in the first sentence of the section? It means the closure of a business that was ordered by the state or any local government of Wyoming. And then we're just going on to the second sentence and adding the same thing.
I think it that is required closures, and what we're trying to get at here is any public health orders otherwise that isn't just closures. So I don't think it's covered. Any other questions? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think it's different as well. And particularly when you read the sentence as amended, required closures shall include the interruption of a business's normal business as a result of any closures or public health orders. That means that it gets more broadly to the interruption of business, not just due to the closure, but due to a public health order, which I think is the intent.
Hearing no other discussion, all in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Motion carries, unanimous motion carries. There was another amendment, I think you said, Senator Beitman, you were going to propose?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would add to that, I would change that amendment slightly on line 7 there and put a comma after closures, insert public health orders, comma, or the disruption in demand caused by any such closures or public health orders. That broadens it even more to the businesses that are down the food chain, so to speak, from the closure. So your suppliers, your contractors, your consultants who weren't ordered to be closed, but the people that they supply or contract to are, or there's travel restrictions. So demand for certain services are wiped out. I think this would help cover that. And that's what this does.
Give me that one more time, Senator Beitman. Or disruption of demand.
Or the disruption in demand caused by any such closures or public health orders. So it's the adverse action down the line from these closures or public health orders or restrictions.
Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Laux. Any discussion? Any discussion? Chairman.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
The one, this language that talks in terms of interrupting a business, normal businesses results in any closures directly out of that, the federal guidance. That's why that language is in there. And so to make it, or the public health orders, which is a little clearer because in Wyoming, those health orders closed businesses, which still had cause of business interruption. When we go down to demand, well, if you've had an interruption in your normal business, that's a loss of demand. So I'm a little concerned about stating it again, and then does that open up a whole nother area to debate? And I'll just give this as an example. In the sugar industry, while we've seen a tremendous increase in consumer sales, which is a very small component of sales, quite frankly, it's around 15%. What we have seen is a significant drop-off to industrial customers because of the lack of people eating out in restaurants and people eating at home. So you open that door up to maybe a set of consumers that, we're not thinking of. It was mentioned earlier, the downtown or the Main Street furniture store. Yeah, I agree. I don't think you want to open that up further. So that's my only caution. I understand the intent. I think it's covered.
Other discussion on the motion. Other discussion. Senator Beitman, would you like to speak one more time?
No, sir, it's getting late. I'm getting hungry. Hangry, actually.
Hangry, all right. All right, all in favor of the motion to add disruption of demand caused by closure or public health order, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. All opposed, same sign. That motion fails 9-3. Is there any other motions on page 8? Any other motions on page 8? Page 8. None. Page 9. We have that March 31st date changed already. Is there any other changes on page 9? Representative Greer.
Let me get off of mute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think then, sorry. Again, I'm with Senator Beitman. Although I'm not hungry anymore, I had my pizza. Just tired, that's all. So this program not will work. Just want to make sure, and maybe I have to ask Brian Fuller, that we put in a clause that the business council shall give priority to those businesses, those eligible businesses that did not receive or preference PPP. Is that appropriate as a Romanet 5, or is it better on the next page?
What do you think, Brian?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Greer, if it's a Romanet, the way it would read would be something like stipends awarded under this section shall give preference to eligible businesses that did not receive PPP funding. The alternative would be a subsection that just reads the council shall give in awarding grants, the council shall give preference to those eligible businesses that did not receive PPP funding. I think the intent's the same. I think it's a matter of wording.
I think I would point it out as a separate subsection. I just don't know right where we put it. Sorry. And I would make that as a motion with LSO giving us guidance where to insert it if it's page 9 or 10.
Moved and seconded by Rothfuss. Any discussion? Any discussion on this motion that the LSO will put in somewhere?
Yeah, question.
Question being called. Crank, I have you down. You don't need. Okay. All right, we'll vote on it then. All in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous. It's unanimous. We'll put it in there somewhere and we'll depend on Brian Fuller to put it in the right place. All right, anything else on page 9? Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
Go to Joe, please. Go to Representative McGuire. My apologies.
Okay, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this would be with regard to line number 11, and that would be every one employee. It's not defined if that's a full-time or part-time. Personally, it's such a small amount, I would leave it for people who have part-time employees. But I just think it's something that we should discuss and make sure that it's whatever our will is on that.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask Chairman Greer, is this where you wanted to insert Wyoming employee? So
yes.
may I, Mr. Chairman, may I move to insert Wyoming employee on line 8?
Line 8? I'm not following that.
Sorry, line 11.
Oh, okay. Is there a second on that? Wyoming employee, yep, Senator Rothfuss, one Wyoming employee that the eligible business had employed. Other discussion, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just ask Brian if it would be better placed on line 12, employed in Wyoming instead of Wyoming employee. It's just wordsmithing, but maybe we can let LSO decide which one works better and move on. Okay.
Okay. All right, all in favor of that motion to put Wyoming in there, one of two places? Whoops. Oh, all right. Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's a majority. So that has passed. Is there anything
Mr. Chairman,
else?
you still need to ask for the no's.
Oh,
please.
yeah. Is there anybody that is against that? Raise your hand. There couldn't be because it was a unanimous vote.
It's all right. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Anything else on page 9? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd make a motion that the line number 11, that it can be full-time or part-time employee.
So had employed full-time or part-time?
Well, define employee as either full-time or part-time for this particular paragraph. However, it's best put by LSO and in best flows.
Ryan Fuller, do you have a fix on that?
Mr. Chairman, I would suggest on line 11, every one, parentheses 1, right after that, say full-time or part-time employee.
Is that okay with you, Representative McGuire? Is there a second on that? Seconded by Senator Rothfuss. Any discussion? Hearing none, raise your hand if you're in favor of full-time or part-time Wyoming employee. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And all those opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes 10-3. Anything else on page 9? Representative Crank.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a kind of a question on line 14 or 13 and 14, but we end up at 50,000 instead of 65,000. I just want a little explanation how we got there. When you do the 15,000 plus $1,000 for each employee, we end up at 65,000 instead of 50.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Chairman Greer.
we just put that $50,000 cap on there with some of the data that the Business Council had on the number of businesses, so we could get them all covered. And here's what it is: when you're running with two full-time, one part-time employees, you're going to get $18,000. When you're a little larger business, you get that economy of scale or that efficiency in your operation. So I wasn't all that concerned about taking that up to 65 being capped. That's why I just voted for the part-time employees, is because I knew we had the cap on. So that was why.
Representative Burkhart.
Nothing now, Mr. Chairman. That explained it. I was going to make an amendment, but that explained it. I won't make the amendment.
Okay. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it seems like based on our change of previous employee count to March 31st, it would make sense for us to conform this to March 31st also, if that was unclear before, unless there's a justification for it. So I'd ask Brian if that makes sense.
We put that in. We put that in that area.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I assume that was a conforming amendment.
Just making sure. Thank you.
Yep. We put that in there. Anything else on page 9? Anything else on page 9? Page 10. Anything on page 10? Anything on page 10 from you hangry guys? Oh, from Hangry Biteman.
Right, you hear my stomach growling. Line 18 and 19, where the tranche 1 is set at 25 million. Like I said, hours ago. I don't think that's enough money. That accounts for roughly 11% of the total of the 1 point, or the whatever we got from the feds, the 1.25 billion or whatever. This money needs to get out to our businesses, and we need to up that amount. I'm okay with whatever you guys think. I'm going to throw a number out there, and it's based on giving these 3 tranches we're dealing with today 50% of the total. So it's going to bump this up to, if you keep that 11% times it by 625 million, it comes out to about $69 million. So I would propose an amendment to subsection G there, subparagraph G, to make that 69 million.
Is there a second? Is there a second? Is there a second? There's a second. Representative Laux seconded it. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion on 69 million? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, if you're going to change this one, I think you might have to go back and change the amounts that we're distributing, because I think the amounts that we were distributing were based on some probable estimates of need. So if you almost triple this without increasing the amount that's possibly available, you wouldn't necessarily even spend the money. Now, I can't say that for certain because, again, they're estimates, but it is a consideration if we've capped it at 50,000 and we're giving 1,000 per employee, that you might struggle then to utilize these funds. If what you want is to increase kind of the value of that grant to small businesses, I think you probably need to also go back and amend the dollars per employee, for example, which is 1,000 now. If you were to double that to 2,000, then you'd be able to spend the 69, I think. And again, I don't have hard data on it, but that's just based on estimates.
If that was at 50,000, it would be 1,380 companies could be serviced. And I think I heard 1,700 companies were in this deal. So Representative Henderson.
I kind of like what Senator Rothfuss is talking about there. You know, we've included the part-time employees as well. So what if it was 2,000 per full-time and say 1,000 for part-time? And I mean, that would be like a in between.
It's rational.
Any other discussion? Other discussion? Other discussion on the amendment to change this to 69 million? Representative Duncan.
Just a quick question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So does that mean you have to change the cap? If we're increasing by that much, do we have to change the cap?
That's a possibility. That's a possibility. Right now, we're not, this motion doesn't do that, but it could in the future. You know, other discussion, Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to say I'm going to resist this motion. If the motion were to come back as changing it to $50 million and then going to the 1,000, 2,000 half-time, full-time concept as a blend, I would support that motion.
Senator Beitman.
Yeah, go ahead, Byman.
Mr. Chairman, I would accept that as a friendly amendment to my motion. So I would be fine with that if it's okay, if I could get a second.
Chairman Greer, we got 2 seconds.
Can I get that? Yeah, can I get that restated? I think I got it right. Please restate that, Senator.
Would you do it, Senator Rothfuss? Would you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the concept is on page 10 to change the 25 million to $50 million. So that's the cap for this program. And then back on page 9, you would have $2,000 per full-time employee on lines 10 and 11, and then $1,000 per part-time employee, which is kind of a blend of what Representative Henderson said also. So to restate, it would be a $50 million cap on page 10, line 19, and then on line 10 and 11 of page 9, it it would be $2,000 per full-time, $1,000 per part-time, and then I'd just have LSO conform the language.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, I think I like that motion. And the reason I do is we just expanded the scope of this program when we didn't limit it to those who did not receive PPP. And I think that's a great policy choice by this committee. So I'm going to support that motion.
Other discussion, All in favor of the motion signify by raising your hand. That's unanimous. All opposed, raise your right hand, raise your left hand, raise any hand. Okay, that was unanimous. 50 million and 2,000 and 1,000 on page 9. Anything else on page
Mr.
10?
Chairman?
Yes, Senator Rothfuss.
I'm just going to say I'm going to switch over to my phone and go video free. I needed to be gone about an hour and a half ago. So I'm still going to be part of the meeting, but you'll see me vanish from this and then join back in through my phone. I won't have my video. So I'll be back momentarily.
Okay. All right, anything else on page 10? No. Page 11. Page 11. Anything on page 11? Nothing? Anything on page 12? Anything on page 12 you'd like to change, alter, or Senator Representative Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, on page 11 there, the date of December 31st, I have to have a question. My understanding is we have to expend the funds. And so is it just, I mean, should that be December 30th or does it matter?
I don't think it matters. December 31st is the last day.
Okay, I thought they had to be expended by the 30th, but okay, fine.
Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, they do have to be expended on by December 30th. You know, the 31st was just the end of year date was just a rounding thing. I mean, that could easily be the 30th if the committee wants.
You want to just make that change to the date to December 30th? We can do that. Okay. Anything else on page 12, I believe we're on. Well, there's a new guy on the chart there, Christopher Rothfuss. He looks a lot younger too. A lot younger than that guy we had. Anything on page 13? Anything on page 13? Any changes? Page 13. Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question for discussion purposes. We kind of touched on it earlier, but my question regards the committee's thought here is, can the business council we're looking at lines 9 through 15 with the business council, basically establishing and administering this program. Do we think that this is even possible to get this thing up and running and getting this money out? Just a little bit more discussion on that from the committee members and what your thoughts are is getting this, is this even feasible?
I'll speak to that, or do you want to, Chairman Greer?
Well, I guess my first comment, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first comment is, what is the other option? Okay, because if it's a grant program or a loan program, we still have to go through an application and those steps. What we were told, we specifically drilled down, this Senator Anderson and I late yesterday. Can you do this? And because this needs to get done mid-June. I mean, so we get the grants that we did before, hopefully we get kicked out at the end of this month. This program's got to get stood up mid-June. So they'll have to do emergency rules. And again, remember, we've had this economic disaster loan program that's been utilized several times that Josh T is familiar with. if we can find some cooperation with our local banks to take the applications, I think they can do it. And so we also talked, the federal guidance provides that we can use the CARES funds to help with the stand-up and administration. So I think they could hire or pay for some part-time help that they may very well need. And that would all be temporary to get us through this process. So Senator Viteman, they seem very positive about doing.
Senator Viteman, I'll add to that. We've had 3 meetings with them, with both their director and their attorney, and we've had suggestions from the governor's office that they'll help with it. We've had so much cooperation on this that there's no doubt in my mind they're going to be able to pull it off. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to remind everybody too, the testimony from the bankers is that our community banks are willing and ready to step in. So this may be on the other banks, that if they're not going to step up, that the community banks are willing and ready. So for our more rural and smaller communities, I think they're prepared and ready to jump in based on that information and based on what I'm understanding. And also my experience with the PPP, it seems to me it was the community banks or the local banks that were stepped in right away and had seamless process. What I kept hearing across the state, it was the bigger banks that were making it more cumbersome. So it may be one of those things that those bigger banks, if they want to, they need to step up if they're not going to come to the plate. So just my 2 cents.
Yeah.
Henderson.
Mr. Chairman, I know we're tired, but this is an important point with this is like Josh Keith, he's already prepared a 1-page grant application for the second bucket. We're working on a 1-page loan application to make that move quickly, which might mean later on we've got to do a little more verification on that, but we're trying to make this super simple. And so a little bit different with the PPP loans, because we were applying for that. The guidance was coming out nearly every 2 hours leading up to that. Business Council's working on it this week to start to have their forms ready. So if we go in next week into session, and if this is approved, they're already going to start having some of this outlined for us. So hopefully it can move quickly. I mean, I know that's the key for everybody, is move quickly, but we're all also experienced with government.
Representative Henderson, did you have something?
Just to underscore what was said, we had some very positive indications from both business and the banking representatives on this possibility. So I think this has a lot of potential for us. And when we get to the point where we want to talk about the amount, I probably want to raise that. But that's I think this is good.
Representative Crank, did you have a comment? No? Oh, okay. Okay, any other questions on page 13? Other questions? No? Page 14. How about anything on page 14?
Okay.
Chairman Greer.
Mr. Chairman, and this is, well, I'm going to leave this as a term of art, but I want to say is that the Business Council may authorize financial institutions to serve as administrators for the program. And I don't know what that means. But what I mean is that the state can issue the loan, but the banks are helping get the loan set up and administering it. And that is to deal with the issue that came up with the SBA loans regarding lending reserves. So I'm gonna make that motion as, and it's got to be conforming to the whole thing, that we can work through that to see if that would help relieve that concern or that issue.
Is there a second? Seconded by Duncan. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Brian, is that going to work for this for in place of eligible lenders?
Mr. Chairman, the only question I would have is if maybe the word servicer.
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah.
How does that fit in?
Mr. Chairman, I would just suggest the word servicer, just to avoid any confusion with paragraph B intro back on 13, where we direct the business council to administer the program, and just to make sure there's no confusion with that term.
So it would, the motion would be to serve as servers for the program?
Mr. Chairman, servicers.
Oh, servicers.
And Mr. Chairman, I think that whole paragraph has to be conformed to fit that concept. And we will have Monday to look at these more conceptual amendments, I guess.
Okay, enter the discussion on the servicers. The servicers change. Yes, Representative Henderson.
I just think we have an opportunity to leave a lot of the granular elements here to the rules that are going to be made in the emergency process with the business council. So I agree, we can wait till Monday to work out some of that.
Okay, all right. All right, any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of changing eligible lenders to servicers? Oh, raise your hand, yes, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
This is Chris. I vote aye.
11. All opposed, raise your hand. That passes unanimously. Okay, anything else on that page? Anything else on page 14? Hearing none. Page 15.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Back
Perfect.
on page, I wasn't quick enough with my mic. Back on page 14, line 17, subparagraph capital A. Do we need to change that to conform to what we just did on Romanet 2? And do we want to consider the 1% per annum, or just a flat fee, or some other number?
So,
Chairman Greer.
yeah, so it's a good point. And I was debating about bringing it up. On the SBA loans, the SBA actually paid the banks a fee to service and process those loans, that separate, distinct. We could, it is conceivable that we could say that the interest rate for these loans is 0. Something wrong with that. And then we could add a section saying that the Wyoming Business Council from this program shall pay servicers, financial institutions serving as loan servicers, a fee of 2% of the loan amount. So there are options that are available out there that we may want to consider.
Other discussion? Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will make that as an amendment then to what Chairman Greer just stated.
It's okay.
Instead of just discussing it, we might as well make an amendment.
I'll second it then.
Second, yeah.
It's been moved and seconded to do what Greer said. Now, I don't know if that's very good or not. I don't know about that.
Brian, did you get all of that?
Brian, do you know what Greer said?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding in summary would be that I believe the interest rate would be 0, and the applicant would be charged a fee of 2% of the loan amount. Okay, I missed that part.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, that the council would pay out of the program a fee to the financial institution serving as a service provider a fee of 2% of the loan amount.
Okay.
I have no idea if 2% is the right number though.
You know, I've discussed this with the bankers. They're perfectly happy with 1% they would take to do this business because it's pretty big business. So I don't know if we want to double their income here. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, when we do, when you go and get a mortgage or something like that, the lenders are basically charging still at this point a 1% origination fee. So.
Okay.
Any other discussion about this Greer motion? Other discussion?
Mr. Chairman, can you see me?
Rothfuss?
Yeah.
Hey, we could see you.
I'm a little blurry.
Senator Rothfuss.
I'd prefer 1% over 2%. I believe the motion on the floor right now is 2%. I support the concept and the structure of it, but a 2% origination fee when we provide the money seems a little bit rich. I would love to be able to facilitate that deal. So I would move to amend the amendment to a 1% origination instead of a 2% origination. And see
I consider that friendly.
Yep, that's friendly.
Okay, thank you.
So it's back to 1%. And the money comes from where do we say?
Mr. Chairman, it would come from this program, from this bucket. Okay. So.
Okay. All right. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honestly, I think we're being just a little bit presumptuous. You know, you have to keep in mind that when a bank makes a loan and they have an origination fee, that's in addition to the interest that they are making on that loan. They're not making any money on these loans. And for example, a $10,000 loan, that's $100 at 1%. Well, that barely even starts to cover the time and overhead that they're going to put into and the paperwork. So I think 2% is a minimum. That is my opinion. And I think that we should be open to further information from the bankers when this comes back up for reconsideration. And I would invite them to take a look at their portfolio. But I don't think we should be making statements as to what the banks will be willing or not willing to do. Thank you.
Other discussion? Representative Laux.
Mr. Chairman, is there input from our bankers that are on the committee to that issue of 1% or 2%?
Representative Furphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, a 2% servicing fee is not unreasonable. That's what a lot of the banks get, especially if you're looking at a 0% interest rate on the loan.
Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I remind the committee, this is a no risk. Unlike a regular loan, this is no risk. And so this is basically a processing fee.
Yeah, the discussion, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a little concerned. So I don't know whether we'll use the whole $150 million that's there, but let's say theoretically that we use the entirety of the 150 million. Even at 1%, that's $1.5 million. If we needed to put together a team to loan out zero interest loans and we had $1.5 million to work with, I think I could get that done pretty quickly. I really feel confident in that. The idea that we would spend $3 million to distribute $1.5 million of state funds with zero risk to the distributor, I just think we're burning cash there. And again, if we needed to say to the treasurer, for example, you take over, here's $150 million, get it out the door as quickly as you can. Oh, by the way, you can spend $1.5 million to get that done. They'll get it done.
Senator Bateman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My concern revolves around the not only the origination of these loans that we're asking the banks to do, we're also, they're in charge of the forgiveness aspect of it as well, I'm assuming, and not the business councils. So is this 1% going to even cover those costs? I'm worried about, I don't want the banks to end up with the short end of the stick and not even be able to cover the cost of origination and the forgiveness end of it and throughout the life of the loan.
Chairman Greer.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you guys are members, really good discussion on this, and we've got a motion before us. What I'd say is the council can authorize the financial institutions. So as Senator Rothler said, if we're targeting $1.75 million to be available for this, maybe they're able to put a team together. Maybe the banks help. Maybe it's a combination of both. We have to keep in mind that these loans are going to make every banker's file look better. Okay? You know, so we always talk about everything, but that business that's there on the edge and struggling, and all of a sudden they get an injection of $100,000 of forgivable cash, all of a sudden that file looks a little better when the auditors come around next year. So there's a mutual benefit for everyone. The reason for the banks know our businesses. They're in our communities. It's a good way for them to reach out and a good way to get the word out there and make sure we get that we reach the people we want to get. So that's why that concept's there.
Representative Duncan.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to drill down on this, but I just want to also remind everyone that this is basically going to be an economic stimulus for a bank, because our lenders are going to have this money and then they're going to attract more business. So it's a win-win in some of the situations for your lenders.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I want to try to go back to what I said before, is that my preference would be to give the business council and the executive branch a wide latitude here, and we're just going to set the policy. I think we're doing that with the program itself, and then we get into the details of how much you're going to do and how much the fee's going to be. I think they can cover that in the rule. So I would just step back a little bit on that.
Other discussion? Question on the amendment. The Greer amendment said something about a 0% loan, and the Wyoming Business Council pays 1% for the loan origination. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, same sign. That amendment passes 8-2. Anything else on page 14? Anything else on page 14? Page 15.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Murphy.
Yeah, what I'm proposing on line 11, after it says financing, delete or any other third party.
Is there a second?
Yep, I'll second that. Clears it up.
Seconded by Greer. Okay. Do you want to explain it, Murphy?
Yeah, exactly. So it would read then, the interest of the council and the lender shall have priority over any claim of the business receiving the finance. The problem is if you have in there other third party, that could mean lenders out there. And so you might need a subordination agreement. So I'm just eliminating that.
Any other discussion on the amendment? Other discussion?
Question.
Hearing none. All in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All opposed, same sign. That motion carries 12-0. Any other changes on page 15? Changes on page 15. None. Page 16. Any changes on page 16? Page, yes, Duncan, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I propose an amendment on page 16, line 16, after the word taxes, insert statutory imposed fees.
So can you read that?
I'm sorry, I forgot the word or. So after the word taxes, insert or statutorily imposed fees.
Is there a second? Is there a second? Is there a second? Is there a second? Seconded by Rothfuss. Okay, or statutory fees. You want to explain that, Representative Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was based on testimony we heard from Mrs. Urbachite.
Any other discussion? Chairman Greer.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you know, I think in the idea of making these loans as forgivable as possible, that this is probably a good amendment. Just like the staff comments about a credit for payroll. Concept being, we give the loans, we want them to be forgiven, and it would be as a result of continuing your business in the state. So a tax or a fee, a lot of my constituents don't know the difference. It's what the government's charging them. So I'm going to vote yes.
Senator Rothfuss. No. Representative McGuire. No. Any other hand fluttering going on that I need to see? All in favor of the motion signify by your raising your hand. All opposed, same sign. That motion counts 11-0. Any other changes on page 16? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is directed to both chairmen. My question is, what if the business goes under, if there's a bankruptcy, or if the business transfers to a new owner? Do we need to have an acceleration provision, or do we need to have a forgiveness provision with regard to the term of 10 years? Thank you.
Chairman Greer.
So I think Representative McGuire, again, I'm just going to refer to what I know, which is that economic disaster loan program. There'll be the loan conditions done by rule. As Bill Henderson saying, give flexibility on that. What we've stated here is that it'll be a non-recourse loan. It'll be tied to whatever bigger collateral it is tied to. So that non-recourse loan means, yeah, if it's in bankruptcy, it's, you know, not going to get paid. Obviously, on a transfer of a business in that scenario, then I think that I don't know what these loan documents look like, but I do know, or what these loan documents will look like. I do know in the economic disaster loan program that there were those provisions for acceleration or approval of the transfer. So they're pretty weak loan documents. I'll just tell you that.
I have an amendment. I think we heard from a couple of the businesses that 100,000 was a little bit light for what they needed to have done. I would amend it to 300,000 there on line 2. The section shall not exceed 300,000 for each eligible business. Is there a second? Seconded by Henderson. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All opposed, raise your hand. That motion carries 7-6. Any other changes, amendments to page 16? Chairman Greer.
Yeah, committee, I think it's worth having a discussion that from the staff notes there, and I don't know the right amount, but that the forgiveness component could also be a percent. I'm just going to say 12% of the business's payroll during the term of the loan is another add-on. I think 12%, I don't know why, but I'll just do that as a motion.
Where are you putting that 12% of payroll?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it would have to be included. Yeah, I gotta get my glass, but it's in the component regarding the forgiveness. Okay, so it'd be enrollment at 8, sorry, versus a council to issue a credit against the remaining principal for any and all state taxes and then state imposed fees paid during the loan, plus a sum equal to 12% of the business's payroll. I'm going to say gross payroll to make that simple for the term of the loan.
And was that a second from Representative Ayer or Representative Henderson? Two of them, yeah, okay. All right. Any discussion? Any discussion on 12% of the payroll? Burkhart, Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wondering about the 12%. The average, based on the information I have in the latest statistics, which aren't real current, 2012, the average pay per employee in Wyoming for businesses less than 500 is roughly $38,000 a year, and that's an average. So if you have a company with 20 employees, there you have 600 some thousand. I guess I just question whether 12 is the right number or not. I mean, if you do it, you could end up potentially forgiving the entire loan in 1 year.
Yeah.
Representative Laux, I think you were next.
Okay.
No? Okay, Chairman Greer.
Yeah, Representative Burkhart, wouldn't break my heart if it was all forgiven in 1 year. 12%, I just realized where I got 12%. Visiting with a friend of mine owns a business with about 20 employees that we were talking about his unemployment rate. He has a certain amount of turnover, some issues with it, and it was 12%, which I thought was astronomical. Now, you only pay that on the first portion of your wages each year, but that's where I got the 12%. That's why that was in my mind. So I'm just looking at if these workers are working, right, it's saving the state money.
Any other discussion? Other discussion on the 12% of gross payroll? Any other discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All opposed, same sign. That motion carries 8-3. Anything else on page 16? Page 17. Page 17. Any changes on page 17? Do you want to just do a consensus on the rest of the bill? No? Anything on page 18? Anything on Representative Burkhart?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for discussion, line 23, it says expenses incurred in Wyoming. What if people are buying stuff off the internet? Is that included? I just want a clarification if that means in Wyoming. I know they pay taxes on it now, so.
Representative Duncan.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just going to ask, wouldn't that be covered because we're collecting sales tax on anything we do via online?
Chairman Greer.
Yeah, I think we're covered, Representative Burkhart. What we want to do is a business that might be located in different states is we want to, for the expenses incurred in Wyoming for the employees, for Wyoming employees. We just want to make sure, I mean, if you just said for expenses incurred for the health and safety of Wyoming employees, I don't know if that Wyoming came out. It's fine. I don't think it hurts anything.
What
are we talking about?
On page 18. Other discussion on page 18. Hearing none, page 19. Any discussion on page 19? I think there was a change that we needed for that. Representative Duncan, do you have that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to propose an amendment on line 1 after the word employees, add and expenses of Wyoming employers incurred in compliance with the public health guidelines.
And you'd put that after Wyoming employees?
Wyoming employees and expenses of Wyoming employers incurred in compliance with public health guidelines. That's how it would read.
And then it goes on to read as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and includes cleaning products, etc. Is that how you want that? Is there a second?
Can you repeat it, please?
Second by Greer. Okay.
Well, okay, so this is again a little bit of the nuance because of this stipend component, is we were talking about health and safety of Wyoming employees. So if we add that language, I understand testimony, but we would want to say for expenses incurred by an employer in the furtherance of the public health and safety associated as a result of the COVID pandemic. I would just add one more qualifier.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Yes, Brian Fuller.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Greer, could you repeat that one more time, please?
I did it once. So that was employees, and that was expenses incurred by employers to be prepared for. I can't remember that part, but I just want to add onto what Representative Duncan had moved. I just want to make sure and add that we say for the health and safety benefit of the Wyoming, or the citizens of Wyoming as a result of the COVID-19. I guess did that much better the first time, but.
Okay. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? All in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All opposed, same sign. That motion carries unanimous. Any other changes on page 19? Other changes on page 19. Representative Burkhart, you have a change?
More of a question right now, Mr. Chairman. Question being on line 3, it says other safety equipment. Does the amendment we just passed cover that it is not things such as fire extinguishers, fall protection equipment, that sort of thing? I think we're trying to limit this to those things necessary for response to COVID-19. So just a question, have we covered that with the previous amendment, or do we need to specifically say safety equipment related to COVID-19?
Representative Duncan.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I take it as we are okay because it says in the first line, as a result of COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, any other discussion? Any other discussion or answers? Okay, all in favor of the Duncan Greer amendment that Brian Fuller has written and costs incurred in compliance for the Wyoming employer? Raise your hand. All opposed, same sign. That motion carries 8-1. Anything else on page 19? Okay. How about page 20? Anything on page 20?
Senator Beitman.
Oh, excuse me. Yep, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lines 20 and 21, I would move that we delete the cap, only because these are expenses incurred to comply with these safety measures. I don't think there should be a cap, especially as low as $200,000 when we heard testimony about some of the bills the mines are racking up already. I don't think it makes sense to have a cap right here. And then later on at the end of this tranche, I'll bring an amendment to raise this tranche amount too. But for now, let's just delete the cap on lines 20 and 21.
So your motion is to eliminate 2021 paragraph 4?
Yes, sir.
Entirely. Is there a second? Second? Is there a second? Is there a second? Seconded by Rothfuss. Any discussion? Chairman Greer.
You know, I think I feel more comfortable if we bump that up to $500,000 and then maybe we double the overall cap on the tranche. I mean, I'm uncomfortable. My reason I'm uncomfortable with removing the cap is that if 5 or 6, 10 or 12 of the biggest employers, who are probably our most sophisticated employers, get in and soak up this money, it makes it more difficult for maybe the smaller ones to be able to utilize. A cap helps give a little more access across the board when we're talking about companies in this situation between 1 and thousands of employees. So I'm all in favor of raising it. I'm not in favor of removing the cap completely.
Senator Rothfuss was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, and those are good points by Chairman Greer. And one of the sensitivities I have, I don't think we should be limiting, but I am concerned with the idea that we don't have any type of skin in the game, any type of match. And so I don't know exactly how we could get at this, but I'd almost want no real cap, or at least a high cap, but at the same time, maybe we only pay 90% or something along those lines of the fees, not because we shouldn't pay it all, but because I know full well from my experience in the Education Committee that for transportation, for example, where we have a 100% reimbursement, you just don't work as hard to be thoughtful.
You're really breaking up, Chris. You're really breaking up. We can't understand you.
We don't have cost constraints. What's that? Oh, bloody hell. 1 second. Excuse my motion for 1 second. This is just how you want a committee. Mr. Chairman, what I was saying was there's no cost constraints on the section overall. And that's kind of a concern where there's no skin in the game for any of the corporations in such a way that they won't be looking for the best deal, looking for cost-effective measures. So while I would like to see a higher cap overall for those that really need it, it would be good if we had a balancing provision of some sort where, for example, 90% of the costs were paid for by this section, or 95%, something that provides an incentive for the entity to look at the bottom line. And I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. I hope that came through more clearly.
Yeah, that was good. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Representative Laux.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I speak in the opposition to the amendment. I like the idea of the 200,000 cap. I mean, some of the people that we want to be able to apply to this are the people that are restaurants are having to hire extra people that have, as a mandate right now, is they have people dedicated to clean in the restaurants. And so I hope it's spread out over those small entities that really had an impact. And yeah, thank you.
Other discussion? Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll go ahead, Mr. Chairman Greer, and split the baby with you and go ahead and take your deal and amend my amendment to raise this cap to, I think it was $500,000, as long as we double the tranche. And that way, you know, we can move forward and get this thing done and over with tonight. So
Second, all right with that? Second's all right with that. So the motion now is change that line 21 to 500,000. Any more discussion? Any more discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by raising your hand. All opposed, same sign. That motion passes 8-4. $500,000. Anything else on page 20? Anything on page 21? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would make a motion that we amend line number 18 to read the council may conduct or contract for random audits. And the reason being is auditing that's a very complicated procedure. That's something that people are trained to do. You don't just take anybody off the street, not that the people from the council are off the street, but you just don't take anybody and send them in to go audit and expect to get a fair result from that. So I think that if it's going to happen, that they would need the ability to contract for it and get professionals done. And also, it should only be done if there's a reason, they believe that there's a reason that there should be an audit. Otherwise, we're trying to help out small businesses, and you send in an auditor and they have to shut down their business for 4 or 5 days to start feeding them information. And it's a counterproductive situation. So that would be my motion. Thank you.
Is there a second on that motion? Is there a second on that? There's a second by Laux. Any discussion? Any discussion? Chairman Greer. You're muted. Chairman Greer, you're still muted.
Sorry.
There you go.
Okay, so the motion I heard was that the council could contract this out. But then the Representative Dwyer, you went on with a bunch of others. So is the motion just that they can contract this out? Or was there more to the motion?
The motion is the council may conduct or contract for random audits.
Okay, if that's the motion, I think it's a darn good one. Okay.
Any other discussion? Other discussion? Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we have that same wording in the other two sections. Do we need to conform those?
Brian, is that why you had your hand up? You were going to conform?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. It's in both of the other sections as well.
Okay, all right. Representative Iyer.
Mr. Chairman, just to comment, if you're talking about a full CPA audit, Representative McGuire is correct. That does take a highly trained individual. I think just to comply with the rules and regulations of these loan documents or grant documents to prove that what you're doing is in compliance is not that complicated. And I think they could do random audits and handle it in-house. Okay,
any other discussion? Other discussion? Other discussion? The motion is to change line 18 on page 21. The council may conduct or contract for random audits of eligible businesses. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, same sign.
And Mr. Chairman, that was conforming for the program in section 2 and a program in section 3. Is that
That's correct. That motion passes 10-2. And yes, Brian Filler has it conforming in both.
Thank you,
Page
Mr.
21, anything else on page 21? Anything else on page 21? Page 22, anything on page 22? Page 22. Representative Burkhardt, what do you have on page 22? Nothing?
Do you want me to come up with something?
No. Representative Laux, did you have something? No? Oh, nothing on page 22. Oh, but Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Line 2, let's double that to 50 million, please.
Oh, yeah. Seconded by Henderson. Any discussion? Any discussion on that 50 million? That was what Chairman Greer said to do, I guess.
suggested?
Question.
Any discussion? Any discussion?
Question.
Hearing none. All in favor of changing the line 2 to 50 million, raise your hand. All opposed, same sign. That motion passes unanimous. Anything else on page 22? Page 22. Anything else on page 22? Hearing none. Page 23. Anything you want to change on page 23?
Question on the bill.
Whoa. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Representative Greer.
Yeah, so a little different process than what we've worked before is we will let these ask LSO to make all of these amendments to this, hopefully get that to us late tomorrow, I would hope, Brian. We would have the weekend to look at it, get further comments, talk with our constituents. And then Monday, we are scheduled, I think, for 9 o'clock. And hopefully we can review just these amendments. If we see anything more critical, we can work that, but then take a vote on the bill. I mean, hopefully it's like an hour and a half, 2-hour meeting Monday would be my hope. But so again, kind of with that comment I said earlier, it expedited, but by God, we're going to vet this, and we're not going to shortchange the process as we pass this baton on to the full legislature.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order? We'll reconvene on Monday at 9 a.m. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Great work, committee. Great work.
Great work, committee. Way to go. Yeah.
But all right. I'm impressed.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.